What the? Oh. Morning and welcome back. I think this is some better space. So again, I heard you all when you said that it was a little bit cramped in the other room. I put out a request, and I think this is much better space to be a little bit more spread out. We've got some extra chairs, so we will continue to meet here in Ackerman 103 in the future. So to get us started for today, one thing that I'll be doing in just about every class is using the first couple minutes to give you a practice question that would be the exact type of question you should expect to see on the midterm, right? This question will review some of the things that we talked about in class previously. So I recommend using some of the time, the first couple minutes of class, to review your notes, to give the question a look and kind of judging based on how confident you feel in your answer. That gives you a good sense of how you've been following along with some of the things we've been going over. So Kevin asks Amanda to teach him how to paint. Rather than do it as a job, Kevin is really interested in expressing himself creatively. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we talked about a bit last class, what type of need is Kevin fulfilling through his communication? Safety, physiological, self-actualization, or love and belonging? I'll give you a couple minutes to think through this, and we'll talk about this together. While people are working on this, is there anybody here for the first time today? Another minute or so. Continue thinking through this or review. Anybody who would like some more time on this one? Okay, great. So let's talk about it. So Kevin's communication about expressing himself through art. How many people believe that this is A, safety? Raise your hand. B, physiological. C, self-actualization. D, love and belonging. Okay. So the correct answer here is C, self-actualization, right? So great job on this first question. You should expect a lot of questions that present a scenario like this one and ask you to identify or map out the communication that's happening, right? And this is self-actualization for a specific reason, right? We can think again about self-actualization as like a pyramid. In order to get up here, right, to be the best version of ourselves, to be creative, we have to make sure that our basic needs are met. If we are starving, we are not going to necessarily want to be an artist unless we're starving artists and we're trying to do it to survive, right? But in this case, self-actualization is about expressing yourself creatively, being spontaneous, right, being in a good mood. So the evidence that he wants to express himself creatively, he's not doing it for the money, he's doing it for himself, right, would put us at self-actualization. So again, we use communication to fulfill needs like that every day. Yes?
What would it be if, say, it was for money, if it was a higher level position, like, how would that change it?
Yeah. So it'd be a safety need, right? So in this case, I think Kevin's communication, yeah. So in this case, Kevin's communication would be, I really need to learn how to do art. I need it for a job. I need to make money. I need to sell my art, right? I need to make a living. So his communication would be very different kind of in order to achieve safety, right? Always be thinking about the end goal of the communication. It's a good question. All right. So we went over some of the elements of that. We also went over some resources on campus, including things like the Writing Center and tutoring. Again, reach out if that's useful to you. We talked about semiotics, right? The study of symbols and their meanings, and the way that we use symbols to communicate with each other. And then I asked you to work in groups on identifying different parts of communication, including group communication, public communication, and so forth. Someone was interested in kind of having us compile the work that you put together last class. So I'll be posting a link to that and sharing some of those types of communication and ideas that you came up with later today. So nobody's new for today, but again, I appreciate you completing that questionnaire. So today, what we're going to be doing is understanding the primary model of communication, what we can consider and call the transactional model, right? This idea that communication is passing between people and mapping out those different parts of communication, I think is useful for us to understand interpersonal communication more broadly. We'll be talking about uncertainty reduction theory and how we use communication to reduce uncertainty. And then lastly, we'll be talking about perception, what it means to perceive each other and build skills in listening. Just a couple quick reminders. The first Canvas prompt is due by the end of the day today. So if you choose to do it, awesome. Otherwise, you need to complete 6 out of the 8, and I will grade your highest 6. So that's available. It has those 3 parts to that one prompt on Canvas. The other note, right, is for attendance. I post the recordings for each class after class. If you miss more than 3 for any reason, including for athletic travel, right, I'm just asking you to complete the makeup assignment for those. That just makes sure that the credits and the work that you're doing, right, doesn't mean that you're not doing it. It just means that there's another way or opportunity for you to do that. So I try to keep everything as accessible as possible to keep you caught up. So what I want to do right now is talk about this communication model and try to understand different parts of interpersonal and group communication. And I find that one of the easiest ways to talk about communication and talk about interpersonal communication specifically is through shows like The Office, right, where it is everywhere, and interpersonal communication forms the basis of drama and of character relationships in TV shows. So I wanted to share a clip from The Office that goes over and in many ways captures these different parts of the communication model. I'll warn you, if you're a little bit sensitive to this issue, it's a little bit crass, like there's a couple jokes that are a little bit off color, but just to let you know. But I do think that it's interesting to follow this, and in particular to pay attention to how Jim and Dwight from The Office are choosing to communicate with each other, and specifically how they're communicating over the phone and how they're communicating with each other verbally, which you would not normally see over the phone.
Here's going to happen. I'm going to have to fix you, manage you to on a more personal scale, a more micro form of management. Jim, what is that called? Micro form. Yes. Now Jim is going to be the client, right? We're going to have to sell to him without being aggressive, hostile, or difficult. Let's go. All right, fine. Ring, bang. Look, close, right,
approved from the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. Well, that's great, because I need paper. Excellent, it's my luck, because we are having a limited time offer only on everything. It's my lucky day. What is your name, sir? I am Bill Butler. Really, that's your real name? Dare you? My family built this country, by the way. Yes, Michael. You want one thing? That's my other one. What? No, but hello? Yeah. I'm just on the phone with this stupid salesman. He's so dumb. Probably just gonna keep him on the line forever and not buy anything. Okay. What's up to you, Jim? Sorry, that was kind of an emergency. Oh, no, what's wrong? You know what? That's private. Boundaries, Dwight. I'm sorry, Mr. Butler. I was saying, so we're having a limited, a little bit louder. I'm hard here. Okay, as I was saying, right now, we are having louder. Okay, our prices have never been lower.
Son, you have to talk loud.
Never been lower. Louder, son, Butler. Our prices have never been lower. Sweet.
So pretty silly, right? Obviously, Jim giving Dwight a hard time, which is very consistent in the show, right? But I think this is a great example of thinking about the different parts of this communication model, right? We have a sender on the one end, particularly Dwight's character, right, is trying to sell paper, right? So he's trying to send a message to Jim, who's a prior customer. Jim is also responding to and communicating as well. So there's times where he becomes the next sender, right? The channel would refer to the method or way by which he communicates. So in this case, it was over the phone, but since it was a practice, right, he actually got to see the other person face to face as well. There's the message that's being sent, in this case, trying to sell the paper, right, and trying to work through this conflict. There's noise, right? So really good example here of noise was when Jim was like, oh, I have somebody on the other line, right? And was trying to prevent Dwight from being able to speak to him. And we also have what we consider feedback, in which case we are responding to somebody else's communication and using that to form our own communication over time. In this way, right, the sender is what is known as an encoder of a message. So if you're ever attaching an email or sending a GIF, right, you're uploading something. That's what a sender does. In this case, Dwight saying, hey, can I sell you some paper, would be an example of being a sender. We're using symbols, right? We're taking what's in our heads, what's on our scripts, and we're putting it out there into the world. That is the sending process of communication. The receiver is the person that is decoding and understanding the message, right? So the receiver takes in that message that's being given, right? So you upload an assignment for me, I look that assignment over, and the receiver of that message. Messages, right? Go back to our discussion last class about semiotics. They can be textual, verbal, or nonverbal, right? So when Dwight is rolling his eyes and is frustrated because Jim is giving him a hard time, that is nonverbal messaging that's changing how communication is happening. But it can also be the audio of the phone call, and it can be something like sending an email, right? Messages are the communication itself. Again, the channel refers to the means by which communication is sent. So channel can range from what we can consider to be cold media up to hot media. We'll talk about that a bit more later in the term. But cold media is generally not very engaged, right? Something such as sending a text or an email doesn't really engage with your senses all that much. But doing something such as a video call or doing something like virtual reality, right? Or face-to-face interaction would be considered to be hot in that it engages with a lot more senses. So how you send the message matters. In fact, according to a communication scholar named Marshall McLuhan, he once argued that the medium is the message, that the way a message is sent or talked about in many ways shapes what that message is, right? If somebody says that a close relative has passed away, right? You're not going to say, oh, that's so sad, frowny face, right? And send that as a message. Generally speaking, you're going to call the person. So the channel and context matters, and being appropriate to that context is important too. Feedback is the idea that a receiver, right, is not this passive static person. Interpersonal communication is interesting because it's dynamic. You can have a conversation with somebody, it can go a million different directions, or it can end in a very different place than where it started, right? Michael is trying to resolve this conflict between Dwight and Jim, and rather than actually have this mock phone call, right, it becomes a case of them teasing each other and giving each other a hard time. In this case, the feedback and response, Dwight rolling his eyes, being frustrated, Jim kind of egging him on and being motivated to give him a harder and harder time, is an example of how feedback makes our communication more dynamic, right? And then lastly, we have this idea of noise, right? Communication and sending a message is never one-to-one. One really good way of thinking about this is whenever you send a photo, right? You take a photo, send it to somebody else, you send a video. I like to send videos of myself at a concert. But whenever I do, right, the video never truly captures what it's like to be there live because it's filtered, it's distorted, it's two-dimensional, there's limitations in recording software, right? In this way, our communication is modified, it's altered, and it's changed with other people. Sometimes this noise can be physical, right? In this case, Jim was literally talking to somebody else or pretending to and saying, oh, I can't talk to you, I'm on the other line with somebody, this guy's stupid, right? Sometimes it can be mental or emotional. Thinking back to Maslow's hierarchy, if we're exhausted, if we're hungry, that's going to dominate our heads, and that's going to create noise that makes it harder for us to, for example, listen to our coach during practice. So noise is kind of like this physical blockade that is impacting and distorting the message that we receive. This happens a lot in conflict. In fact, one really easy way to help to resolve a conflict, right, is to ask the other person to say what you said to them. And oftentimes you'll find in a heightened emotional state, it's harder for us to listen to and understand each other. Asking the other person to relay that back shows us the role that noise has on our communication. Again, Office is a great way of thinking about these different steps of the communication model. Another thing that's mentioned in your text that's not considered one of the main 6, but is kind of good to know about is environment, right? Environment can be connected to the role of noise or the role of the message itself, right? Environment would just refer to the location or context in which communication is happening. So if you are talking to somebody on a busy highway, right, or near a busy highway where you need to speak up and yell, it's going to be very different than an environment where you're in a small classroom. So the environment or situation matters a lot too to understanding these parts of communication. Any questions on these? Another thing that I think is useful for us to think about, including in the context of that video, is the role of perception, right? Perception essentially refers to the ways that we make sense of and understand the world. So perception is a 3-step process. You can kind of think about it like doing the laundry, right? When you do the laundry, you have to sort your clothes, you have to categorize them, you have to hang them up. Oftentimes, right, or maybe you've just got a big pile next to your bed. That was me in college, I understand, right? The perception process is how we make sense of messages. So the first step is that we are attending or paying attention to what's going on and trying to make sense of the sensory information and data that we have. If you're talking to somebody and you're in a crowded shopping center, you know, or you're in an auditorium where there's a lot of other noise and distraction going on, right? You are choosing to attend to and focus on that person. There's a lot of communication, there's a lot of noise happening. You're focusing on that, or you're working on a group activity and you're talking amongst members of your group, but you also know there are other groups talking, right? We use selective perception, right? Which sometimes can be seen as a negative thing, like, you know, sometimes we don't listen when we have a roommate or family member that's telling us to do chores or something like that, right? But we use selective perception as a survival strategy. If we 100% listen to every single thing going on around us every single day, then our brains would be overloaded. We wouldn't know what to focus on. So we're constantly trying to filter and parse out the most important details that inform our communication with other people. We also have organizing, right? Organizing is sorting the laundry, figuring out where your socks go, figuring out where your shirt goes, right? It's figuring out and making sense of that information in your brain. The sort of mental flip that Dwight does when he realizes that Jim is just trying to give him a hard time is an example of organizing that perception and information. You find out somebody's being sarcastic and you organize or sort it into sarcasm. And then we have interpreting, right? Interpreting is this idea that we're making sense of and understanding the data that we receive. Think back to Wednesday, right? I'm going to the Apple store. You understand and interpret its meaning to be Apple, the company, based on your own experiences, based on the context and situation, right? So we choose which messages to pay attention to, right? Sometimes on a Friday, or if you're in a really boring class, right, you might not be providing that same perception, but it's how we try to make sense of and understand the world around us. Yes.
Is that the same three types of perception that is in the assignment that we're working on?
Yes.
Okay, because I couldn't find the three types.
Yeah, they're talked about a little bit, but it would be attending, organizing, and interpreting. Yeah. So what I would like you to do is take a few minutes on your own, and this will be your attendance activity for the day. And you can either type this and email it to me at the end of class, or you can write it by hand and turn it in on a separate sheet of paper by the end of class. And I just want you to take some time on your own to think about a few words that you would use to describe yourself to other people. For example, I'm friendly, or I'm an athlete. Consider, anywhere between 3 to 5 words that you feel like would describe you pretty well. And then after you've done that, I want you to take some time to think about what it means to be a good listener. So what makes somebody a good listener? What are the things that they do that you would highlight as good listening? Got another minute or so on this. Is there anybody who would like some more time? So what I would like us to do for now is I want us to go around the room and I'd like you to share your part one. So remind us your name since we're still getting to know each other, and share some of the words that you use to describe yourself overall. So let's go ahead and start here on this side.
So I'm Bree, and I said loyal, respectful, and hardworking.
I'm Sydney, and I said athletic, outgoing, and trustworthy.
On the second row.
I'm Tucker. I said honest, caring, athletic, and understanding.
I'm Natania. I said upbeat, outgoing.
Calvin, I said, not just tall,
Not just,
I'm honest and reliable.
yeah, remind us again.
Scary, I said, I'm respectful, caring. My name is Zeke. I said I'm responsible, caring, creative, and
Let's move on here to the middle.
Maxon, I said I'm athletic, social, and hardworking.
Mosaic, friendly, popular, and talkative. Tyler, I said approachable, outdoorsman, and hardworking. Mick, I'm athletic, creative, honest, and I'm Tycho, and I'm sleepy, tired, and can't think of any more words.
It is Friday. Let's move on here to this side, starting working.
Yeah, I'm Brock. I said baseball, hunting, family, and attorney. Sophia, I was way back, quiet, hardworking.
My name's Sam. I said I was caring, athletic, and respectful.
My name is Jason. I said I was loyal, kind, and caring. My name's Aiden. I said goofy, passionate, and loyal.
I'm Brooke. I said funny, smart, and reliable. I'm Gracie. I said caring, shy, and friendly. I'm Macy. I'm athletic. I'm Kirsten. I said kind, passionate, quiet, and artistic.
I'm Josh, and I put crazy, friendly, easy going,
Nice. Since we have shuffled rooms, I just wanted to make sure as I'm getting everybody's name memorized that I have the locations of everybody. Of course, you're welcome to move around. That just helps me to learn everything. So yeah, I appreciate you all taking the time to share some things that you'd use to describe yourself, right? This refers to sort of the perception process, but also refers to the process of self-disclosure and the ways in which communication impacts how we can understand our own environment, right? So we use communication to create these labels and try to understand who we are and how we can shape ourselves with other people, right? If you use words to describe yourself, such as outgoing, such as shy, such as artistic, right? There's a good chance that somebody has said that about you, or that over time, there's something about those labels that have helped us to figure out where we fit in, right? Labels in communication are used to define and help us to understand who we are, right? In a world without communication, how would we even describe ourselves? How would we even know what we are? This idea of difference from Kenneth Burke is this idea that we know what we are because we know what we're not, right? So if you were to say, I am outgoing, it means I am not shy or quiet or reserved, at least most of the time, right? So the perceptions that we hold about ourselves happen through communication, and communication cognitively impacts our way of thinking about the world. This is the idea of self-concept, right? So self-concept refers to the labels that you all use to describe yourself, right? Those are the things that you understand about who you are that make you perhaps unique, different, and specific. You're outdoorsy, you're creative. So those labels and terms that you use, and again, those labels can change over time depending on your mood, right? Some people are outgoing, but also a bit introverted, are different than self-esteem. So self-esteem is about making a sort of value judgment about who we are as people, right? So if you were to say that, I'm pretty reserved, and you think to yourself, I'm too quiet, I wish I could express myself more or be a little bit more confident, that's making a negative judgment about your self-concept using self-esteem, right? We do this in a lot of interpersonal communication when we're trying to define both our self-concept and self-esteem. If we feel negatively about ourselves, we say, oh, I said something really silly in class, and you mentally rewind it in your head, right? That would be an example of using interpersonal communication to impact your self-esteem. I know that you've probably got these ideas down to some extent, but I do think that it's good to touch base on those and the ways that they impact our communication. All right. So one idea that I think is really important for us to think about is this notion of uncertainty, right? When we communicate with other people, we are communicating to produce a sense of unease and uncertainty that we feel about them and about the world more broadly. Thinking back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We communicate in order to fulfill needs, to establish security, basic resources, to create a sense of family, to create a sense of belonging with other people, right? And as you're doing, for instance, group work or other activities with students that you don't really know yet, or you're talking with me after class, right? You are using communication in a manner of reducing uncertainty. So communication, and the more that we communicate with somebody, the more that our patterns and behaviors with that person become predictable and clear, and therefore, the less anxious we become about that person. Oftentimes, early in the communication process with other people, we have a fight or flight response in our brain, right? We're oftentimes told from a young age, stranger danger. Don't talk to people that you don't know or don't trust, right? And that experience of feeling anxiety around a person early on is something that breaks away through the communication process. Again, a lot of that is nonverbal, especially communicating face-to-face. In fact, early on in communication, we oftentimes experience less nonverbal communication. And as we feel more comfortable with that person, we come to trust them a little bit better, we physically open up with that person. We gesture more, we laugh more, we are offering a bit more of a response, right? Another thing that's true about uncertainty reduction theory is that the more that we disclose and feel comfortable with that person, the more lopsided our communication can be, right? If somebody is sharing this incredibly long story about how they were trying to get to their first day of school, but they fell into a river and they were sopping wet coming into their first class, you would think to yourself, I don't know this person, they're oversharing, right? So oftentimes, the lopsided communication is something that comes with comfort. So uncertainty reduction theory is a key idea in communication. And it comes from these folks, Charles Berger and Richard Calabrese, who come in from a perspective of understanding communication in the uncertainty process. How many people are familiar with the term catfishing? Several of you, right? How many people have seen the TV show Catfish? You do, right? So catfishing refers to the idea of essentially deceptively portraying yourself online or pretending to be somebody that you're not, right? So there are a lot of stories of catfishing, particularly in the context of dating, right? People will post a photo of somebody else and say, oh, it's so great to get to know you and learn about you, right? And then over time, right, that will be used to deceive, oftentimes to scam somebody. Hey, I really want to see you, but I need money to buy a ticket so that I can come out, right? So I think over time, generationally, we've become a lot more wary of online communication and of people that we meet online, right? But we communicate with others, including online, in a manner to reduce what's considered to be both cognitive and behavioral uncertainty. So cognitive uncertainty means in our heads, is this a trustworthy person, right? How are we mentally sorting or categorizing that person? So oftentimes, if we're getting to know somebody, maybe a new friend, or maybe going out on a date, there are a lot of things that are important to us in making good friends. If you're dating somebody, maybe there's some things that you consider to be deal breakers. How do they feel about kids? How do they feel in terms of social and political stances on it, right? So we feel cognitive uncertainty and try to understand and figure out who that person is, right? We need to know what the clothing is if we're trying to sort our laundry. And behavioral uncertainty is a question of what that person is going to do, right? So we feel a lot of uncertainty behaviorally if we're worried that somebody is unsafe, potentially dangerous, etc. Right? That's why stranger danger is taught to us a lot of kids in order to reduce behavioral uncertainty and ensure we're interacting with people that we would consider to be safe. So I want to show just a little trailer from Catfish because I think it does a good job of helping us to understand how the process of meeting somebody in person that you've been talking to online is a method of reducing uncertainty.
Hi, Neve. I need help in meeting my fiance, Steven.
Wait, I need help meeting my fiance.
Yeah, my name is Lauren. I met the love of my life online 8 years ago and have yet to meet him face to face. 8 years ago.
He is literally like the perfect guy for me.
We haven't been able to find him or music by him anywhere. He isn't. So we said it is. And we met him on the but it was definitely getting close. Whoa. We got him.
What else have you done?
I gave him my bank information.
What?
Yeah. Have you ever just sent her money? Yeah. How much? A couple thousand maybe. Jesus, man.
How do you, man, I don't think about everything. You know, it's
I'm in Derek's driveway.
Damn, what did he live in? Like, we didn't even $10 too.
You don't think this girl has been using it? I don't think so.
Wow, Catfish curveball.
I'm not going to sleep well tonight. I was about to say, yeah, I want to sleep for myself, but the truth is.
So I think reality TV and the way that it like portrays and uses human beings, or in many ways like creates characters or versions of people for TV, right? Gives us a lot of examples of interpersonal communication. And there's a good chance if you watch reality TV that you like can't unlearn analyzing it, right? So in this case, right, Catfish, the hosts of the show learn about people who are forming connections online and help those people to actually meet them face to face. Turns out that oftentimes their gender, their appearance, all of those things are very different once they actually go to meet that person, right? But the process of going to meet somebody and actually interacting with them face to face is an example of uncertainty reduction, right? Reducing cognitive uncertainty, figuring out who that person is, and making sure that that person fits within your mental picture and the stories that they told. There's that clip of the guy who's crying because it sounds like he's always lying to me. There's also behavioral uncertainty. Is this person safe? Wow, this person is living in a totally different location than where I thought they were going to be, right? So we oftentimes are dealing with that through self-disclosure. One thing that tends to happen, right, in relationships and conversation that initiates online in particular, is that we will make specific gestures to try and reduce uncertainty with that person. For instance, somebody might be apprehensive about meeting with somebody on a dating app unless they've talked on the phone, unless they've done a video chat or shared some information that would make them feel safe and understood, right? Exchanging photos, some more appropriate than others might be another example of reducing uncertainty through communication. So URT, I think, is a useful framework in thinking about why we communicate and some of the sort of mental barriers and hangups that we might have through our communication. So we reduce uncertainty in 3 different ways. We can think about the example of a lot of apes, right, and monkeys that are considered to be really good observational learners. So one monkey is successfully able to open a box here on the left, and the monkey on the right learns how to open the box himself just by walking it, right? In this way, observation in a passive way helps us to reduce uncertainty. So for instance, you're seeing other students in the class, you're paying attention to them, maybe they're wearing a sports jersey for their favorite team, and you think to yourself, seems like they're into sports too, or maybe they like some of the same teams that I do, right? So passive is a way that we reduce uncertainty. Really easy example of this is just kind of like scrolling through social media and seeing headlines and other information. Active is agentic, right? So active might mean that you are choosing to look up somebody's profile. In fact, a lot of people who are dating, for instance, will search for and find somebody's online profile before they go to meet them to figure out if they're who they say they are, but maybe just to learn some fun things about them or just some things that will help you feel more comfortable once you actually meet face to face, right? So active efforts to reduce uncertainty don't involve interacting with that person, but they involve you trying to learn about that person, right? A really good example of this is in middle school, right? If your middle school experience is anything like mine, there were a lot of cases of people like asking their friends to find out if somebody liked them, right? Can you talk to them? Can you tell them if they like me or not or whatever, right? A lot of examples like that where you're using other people to gain information about somebody. What has this person seen? What are they up to, right? But you're not the person interacting with them for whatever reason. Then interactive is about direct contact with somebody else, right? So interactions reduce uncertainty. One thing that our brains really do as a survival tactic are patterns, right? We over time, through pattern recognition, we become more comfortable and more secure with other people. For instance, I had a coworker who was in the office right next to mine and was incredibly chatty and talked to me at about the same time every morning. The first time he did it, I was thrown off guard. I was a little frustrated because I was trying to work, right? But then I knew over time that he was going to come over and talk to me at about the same time every day. And I felt more comfortable and more at ease talking to him, knowing that I should come to expect that. Generally speaking, right, studies suggest that we like people the more that we interact with them over time, right? So pretty straightforward. The easiest way to reduce uncertainty is this idea of reciprocal self-disclosure. In other words, you are breaking down your walls, you're sharing information about yourself to them, and they're breaking down those walls too and sharing information. Again, it can be very one-to-one early, right? How are you? Good. How are you? But over time, you'll come to share a few more details. We'll be talking about the Shrek onion later in the class, but it's this idea, right? Humans have layers of the very basic and superficial elements of each other that we disclose, leading to some of the deeper and more personal elements. We reduce uncertainty based on somebody's ability to reward or punish us, right? We see this a lot in the workplace. If there's somebody that has power over us and we want to share a case of workplace discrimination, one thing that we might be fearful of that is not legal, right, is retaliation, that disclosing or sharing that information will be used in the way that we hope it gets used, right? So we will not disclose to somebody who is going to punish us for our disclosure, but oftentimes if we see a reward, like we get to know somebody better, we feel more comfortable, we feel more safe around that person, we might disclose a bit more. We also consider whether somebody meets or violates our expectations, right? So we create mental expectations, perhaps stereotypes about other people. Whether or not somebody is following those might make us more anxious, might put our guard up. I didn't know this about you, or I never saw you yell or scream like that. I'm really uncomfortable, right? Goes against our expectations and might cause us to disclose less. And then another question of whether or not we're going to see that person again. How many people have ever experienced road rage? Yeah, several of you, right? Road rage is very common. People yelling at each other on the road, people flipping the bird. Oftentimes because we know that we're not going to see that person again. Right? We're going to drive by them and not have to deal with it. So we might perceive that interaction as low risk. What's the point of disclosing and sharing more if I'm not going to meet this person again? So self-disclosure is more common in settings where we feel a need to get to know that person longer term. So the other part of the prompt that I asked you to think about for today is what makes a good listener. And I'd love to hear from a few volunteers to share some of the characteristics that help to make for good listening. The topic we're starting to explore, but we'll be getting into in a bit more detail. Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Josh. Right. This idea of that you have fully kind of perceived and interpreted a message before you respond to it. Oftentimes we do what's considered to be reactive speaking, where the immediate thought that comes to our heads when we hear something is what we respond with, rather than time that it takes to really understand what somebody else is saying. What else makes a good listener? Yes, in the second row.
I said your body language while you're listening to them, so I nod my head or asking questions about what they're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Tucker. So nonverbal communication. Oftentimes we'll nod, we'll say yeah, as a way of indicating our comfort and understanding of a message. One thing that tends to happen when we know that somebody is fake or pseudo listening, right, is when they start saying yeah, at inappropriate times. So somebody says, hey, how are you doing today? Oh, I'm pretty good. I went to, yeah, right? We know that somebody isn't really paying attention when that happens. Bree, you had your hand up as well.
I think if they're someone who's respectful towards the person they're listening to, they listen with open ears and pay attention to the communicator.
Yeah, paying attention to the communicator, right? Paying attention to feedback, modifying our communication based on feedback, right? Are really important elements of this. If you're talking to somebody and they seem really upset or sad, you're not going to spend 10 minutes talking about your day. You're going to say, hey, what's wrong? You seem a little off, or you're going to alter your communication to make way for their concerns. How many people read To Kill a Mockingbird? Yeah, so several of you probably read that in high school, right? Atticus Finch is the well-known attorney in that. And one of the things that Atticus Finch is famous for saying is the empathy about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and walking around in them for a while, right? This idea of empathy and relating to other people is crucial for listening. It's about emotional intelligence and our ability to understand the emotional state of other people. We are good listeners when we are sensitive to the needs, concerns, and issues that other people might have and are able to adjust our own communication, those things in mind. So all good observations on listening and the listening process, and we'll be diving into listening a bit more. So to wrap up for today, we talked about communication to understand who we are, including the communication model with those different parts. Uncertainty reduction theory and the process of using communication to reduce our apprehensions, and effective listening and how we understand and use emotional intelligence to engage with other people. So next week, we will be looking at writing and some of the skills of being a good writer. You all completed that survey already, but I encourage you to look through OWL and writing resources that are linked on Canvas. So please pass forward or email me your prompt for today. Make sure that your name is on it, and have a great rest of your Friday. Hopefully get some sleep if you're a bit tired, and I'll see you again next Monday.
Professor,
Yeah.
last night I was doing the reading, the assignment, like all 22 pages.